Hello, my name is Mike McKee, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about Alteryx reporting. Now, generally speaking, if you're going to do reporting from your data, you're going to be using Tableau, Power BI, Liquid, some type of a visualization software. But Alteryx does have a number of reporting tools in here which can lend themselves really well to PDFs, PowerPoints, emails, things of that nature. And today, I'd like to explore a little bit of the different ways that Alteryx can render your reports. All right, the Alteryx reports are in the reporting section right here. Okay. In prior classes, we've talked about the in, out, the preparation, the join, the parse, and the transform, which are going to be the mainstay of how you're going to manipulate your data. The reporting section is how you're going to present it. Now, in this particular example, like in the other ones, I went ahead and attached a zip file. The zip file has the template we're going to be working on right here. It has the output, which is the finished version of what we're going to build. It's got some data inputs, and we're going to be using some of these in our workflows today. It's got a place to put our data outputs, and we're going to generate a lot of outputs today. And they're all going to be going in here just so you have a structured place, but you can put them anywhere you want. A few graphics that we will use today. So go ahead and just double click the template, and let's go ahead and get started. Now, I've already brought some data in here, and I just put a sort tool on here just so we can kind of see it and see what it's like. And you've seen this data in some of my other trainings. And it's just store information with sales information and then the location of the store. And one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the table tool up in the reporting section here. Right? The first two tools that we're going to talk about are going to be the table tool and the render tool. Okay? This is going to be the basic mechanics of using the reporting. And then we'll start to get into some of the more the features and the bells and whistles and things like that. So, basic table, I will go ahead and run that. And what you're going to notice is that when I'm looking at the basic table, you have your data coming in. And note, I've done zero configuration on this at all. Absolutely nothing. Data coming in. And when the data leaves, it has transformed all of that data into a blob. So you don't see your data anymore. It has turned it into a piece of graphic information. Note that you can't really visualize this in the results section. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to add a browser. And this is key. Whenever you're working with the reporting tools, you're going to be adding a lot of browsers to see stuff. Now I go ahead and run it, and when I look at the browser, I can now visualize exactly what I've just created. Default configuration just gives you some basic headers, alternating colors on the rows, and it just gives you a real fundamental table. And the thing that I like about this is that you don't have to do any configuration to get this basic table here. Now, I go ahead and in order to output this, because I can't really output this to a generic output tool like we've learned before, what we have to do is we have to use the render tool. So let me drag down the render tool and connect that up. Now, with the render tool here, I can go ahead and I can send this to a temporary document. And oftentimes I will do this just to kind of see it before I go ahead and send it out somewhere permanent. When you send it out somewhere permanent, you're going to go ahead and choose a specific output file and then go ahead and just select your location and go ahead and call it and name it whatever type is appropriate for what you're trying to do. I would assume most of the time we're going to be going to like to the Excel 2000 spreadsheets, things like that. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and do a temporary Excel. The data output field is table in case you had multiple output fields, and we'll play with that a little bit later. If we had multiples right here, you could put separators between them, and a little bit of capabilities for changing things around a little bit. And this becomes a little bit more important if you're not going to Excel, but you're going to a PDF or something like that. And then, of course, you can change some of the default styles. All right, so I run this. And when I look at my output here, temporary file, I open that. It is simply an Excel file that has that information in it, exactly like we saw in the Browse tool. Simple, easy, no configuration. It makes it very, very straightforward to do, very, very easy to use. Now, in this particular example, I just created a table, put the entire thing into Excel. This is not an actual Excel table. This is just graphics that have been put in here. So just be aware of that. It's not a table as Excel knows it. All right. Let's go ahead and explore this in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to drag down another basic table tool here and hook it up. Right. Now, for this table tool, I'm going to configure it just slightly differently. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group by county. Okay. Now, I'm not going to change anything else. I'm still going to leave it as just county. And when I go ahead and run this, you'll note that it's now broken up every single county into its own table. Right? Add a browse tool to that so we can take a look at that in more detail. So there's Adams County, there's Arapahoe County, Boulder County, and you can see they're just stacked up here. I got Adams County, Arapahoe, Boulder, etc., etc. Right? So all of them are just stacked up right there. And you can go back and forth here. There's 11 to 15, and there's records 1 through 10. As you can see, I've got 15 records here. So, 15 different tables have been generated. Simple and easy. Very similar to what you can do with the output tool. Now, I will go ahead and bring the render down again, exactly like we were doing before. Now, in this situation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose a specific output. And I'm going to go ahead and select single sheet. All right, so let me go up to my output here. And I'm going to select an Excel file. Right, and I've already got a bunch of them there, so it's just going to be the single sheet Excel. Now, one of the things to be aware of with the render tool is it's always going to overwrite your entire file. You don't have quite the granularity you're going to have with the data output. So be aware of that. And so it's a little bit more restrictive in what you can do, but it does open up a lot more possibilities as to what you can do. All right. So my data field right here, note that I have two data fields. Table is the only one that has a graphic element, so that's the only one that's really going to allow you to choose. There's no space between records. I'm going to go ahead and choose insert some white space, but you could do a line or a section break. You do have some options in there depending upon what you're doing up here. If you're doing like a PDF, the section breaks might be a little bit better. And now when I run this, and I look at my output, I still only have a single file being created. But when I open that file, I've got all of my graphic elements here stacked up with a spacer in between. Right? So if you're creating multiple reports, and I'm just splitting this up right here for an example, but you might have different elements of your data. You create different tables from different locations in your data, and maybe you want it stacked up on the same sheet or displayed in the same location. All you have to do is go ahead and stack your elements up, and you can display everything on the exact same page, right? Union tool to bring them all together. All right, that's one option we have here. Now, let me drag another render tool down and hook that up. Now, what if I don't want them on the exact same page? Perhaps I want multiple spreadsheets. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose a specific output again, right? And I'm going to choose my Excels. Right? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose multiple files, right? But I'm going to change that just so that I get the what I'm looking for. So multiple files is going to be my base name. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the data into separate reports. So I check that. And it's going to ask me what field to group on. And this is going to be very similar to the data output tool. And in this situation, I'm going to group on county. And you probably already kind of see this coming. I'm going to append the group to the file name, but I can prepend it. I could replace the file name with the group. I could replace the entire file path if I have that. So you do have a variety of options there. Table is my data field, the only thing that I have there. No spacing between records because I don't really have any. You know, if I had multiple Adams County here, then that, could be relevant. And now when I run that, what you'll notice is I've now created a whole bunch of different files, right? And if I open that, I've created one file for each county there. Right? And the nice thing about this is now I can generate multiple files, all with a single tool, which is really nice. And I can put the different graphic elements in them because the basic table is going to create a nice table for each one. And then when each one of these go out, you have that nice table look in it. All right, but let's even take it a step farther. And maybe I don't want separate files. I want separate tabs in a spreadsheet. Now, separate tabs do work a little bit differently in Alteryx. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to pull out a layout tool. And I'm going to drag that layout tool down and I'm going to hook that up. Okay. Now, the way I'm going to configure this basic layout tool is that the layout mode is going to be each group of records. All right, let me look at my input here. I'm going to group by county. Now, I'm going to do vertical section breaks. And you do have a few more options here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when I get into some more details for the layout tool. My data field, I've only got one, so it's going to be table. Alignment will be center. And section name, which is the key, is going to be county. Right? So my grouping by and my section name here are the same. I go ahead and run that. And what I notice is that it came in as a table. It leaves as a layout. All right? Now when I put the render tool down, and in order to do this particular process, I have to turn them into layouts as opposed to tables. So in the render tool here, I choose a specific output. I'm going to choose an Excel file. Now, in this particular example, I'm going to do multiple sheets. And remember, it does overwrite it each and every time. Layout is the only one that I have, so it's going to be layout. I don't have multiple records, so I won't worry about the spacing. And when I run this, note a single file. And when I open that file, it's put that chart on every single tab with the appropriate tab names. Now, in the layout tool, I could have grouped it by one and called the section names by something else. So, I had a bunch of different options that I could do. So the section names would be the tab names, and the grouping would by whatever element you want on each tab, things like that. But if you're going to be putting it into separate tabs, you do need to preface it with the layout tool to get it in the proper format so the render tool can do that. If you just put it into the render tool, as we're doing right here, then it's going to go ahead and go into to separate files with the table. With the layout tool, it allows you to do individual tabs in a spreadsheet. All right, so that's the basic mechanics of how you're going to use the different, so the table, for example, in this situation, and then render it to a file. Right. Now, the render tool oftentimes is used on the server. So if you wanted to display these graphic elements on the server, this is the way you do it. I go over that into a lot more detail in the server class. And so a lot of these classes will kind of dovetail into each other so that you learn all the reporting and how to work with a lot of that stuff. That goes straight into the server so you can display that and then download those elements from the server. Now, let's get into a little bit more detail on some of the features that we can use in the uh, uh, basic table and things like that. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and drag down the table tool again here and hook that up. Right. I don't necessarily have to sort them. I'm just kind of doing it so that it's easy to see for everybody. Now, with the basic table, some of the simplest things that we can do, let me go ahead and I'm going to throw a browse after this. So some of the simplest things that we can do with this is we can add different elements, right? Like we saw before, I can run it and I can get that same basic table. Now, if I take a look at the default table settings here, this kind of gives you the table as a whole. What font do you want your data in the table in? What size do you want it? What text color? Now, we saw the white and the off-white, the alternating colors on the lines. That's going to be these two right here. You can make them whatever you want. Rows per group. We could have header information. Perhaps you want a different font. Perhaps you want a different font size. Bold the header. Text color, background color, etc. Remember I said it was a graphic element and not an actual table. What do you want your borders to look like? Maybe you want a slightly thicker border width, maybe different border colors, etc. And then the basic table information. Right. So I changed a couple things here. Right. I run that. And you can see that I've changed that header a little bit. You know, the borders are just a little bit thicker here. Um, and it's just the header information that I changed. Right, so simple and easy there. If I go back into the basic table, I could also edit the row rules or edit the column rules. And let's play with the row rules first. So let me go ahead and I'm going to create a row rule. And I'm just going to call it row rule 1, but you'd probably give it something a little bit more descriptive if you're going to create multiple rules. I can have it always do something to the rows, so I'm changing every row at once. I can do something kind of generic for the rows. So I could say, okay, if the row happens to be, something, or I could use a formula. And I'm going to go ahead and show you using the formula here. And I'm just going to do a real simple formula. You'll notice that the formula right here looks very similar to some of the other tools that we've used. The formula tool, the filter tool, things like that. So if you know how to use those, this is going to be pretty straightforward. And I'm going to use existing fields. And I'm going to say total taxes due have to be greater than 60,000. Okay, so this is my expression. And obviously you could get a lot more complex. We've got all the variables, we have all the functions. You can bring in multiple columns if you want. So you can get as complicated as you want with this. Now, when this formula is true, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the text color white. And I'm going to make the background color red. Right? Just to kind of show a difference and highlight it a little bit. Right? You can do a lot more in here. You can change the font, the sizes, justify it differently, whatever. Go ahead and close that. Oh, one other thing to note is that we do have that this rule should override conflicting per column rules. So if you have column rules and you have row rules that are competing for a specific cell, which do you want to override? Right? And in this particular situation, I'm not going to worry about it because I'm only going to do this. And when I run that, you'll notice that I have changed it considerably. So now I have a conditional statement here, and that conditional statement is changing every row that has a total sales, the total taxes due of over 60,000. Right? So I can highlight things conditionally. Right? And this is really the power of the table tools, that you can do these kind of conditional um, colors and fonts and whatnot. And then you use all of these mechanisms up here to go ahead and send the file to whatever is appropriate for your visualizations. All right. So let's go ahead and let's take this a step farther. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab another basic table tool. Bring that down here and hook that up. And with this basic table tool, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a row rule on this one. Right? And so create a row rule, and we'll just do a simple one when the total taxes are greater than 60,000. Right? So I could use this since my formula is pretty simple instead of using the formula itself. And I'm just going to go ahead and just real quick change the text color to red. Right, simple. Got to add that browse tool. Run that. And I just changed the text color to red. Easy enough. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's create some row rules now also. So I'm going to go to county, and I can create a row rule. Now, when you're looking at the rows here, I can rename the field. I usually do automatic width. I find that if you start doing percent and fixed, it gets a little bit more difficult. Obviously, you have those capabilities. Just be aware of that. Whether you want to align it, whether you want borders on it, etc. If it's a number, how many decimal places would you like on that? And I can create the custom rules. And I'm going to go ahead and create a custom rule for this one. And you'll note that it's the exact same configuration as the row rules. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a formula here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, let's go to existing fields. And let's take county. I'll get rid of that one here. And I want the county to equal Adams County. And then okay. So whenever the county equals the Adams County, what do I want that column to do? Right? So what I want that column to do is I want the text color to be black, and I want the background color to be yellow. Right? I want something different that'll stand out from the other one. So when I run this now, anywhere it says Adams County, I get the yellow. Anywhere that I have total taxes due here, over 60, I have the reds, right? Note that the Adams County right here is in yellow. Sorry, the text is in black. When I go back into my table here, note that I've got county bolded in red, bolded, which tells you that I have a rule for that, right? If I was to come down to total taxes due, I could create a rule. We'll say the same thing, that the county equals Adams County. Whoops. Adams County. There we go. All right. Now, one of the things that we note here is edit the row rules. And we had the row rules should override conflicting per column rules. If I check that, that means that this rule should take precedent. So now when I run it, you'll note that right here, this is now in red. And also note that in the basic table, I did create this rule, and the rule's working, but I didn't actually specify what I wanted to have happen to that rule. So just creating the rule is not enough. You need to create the condition and then decide what you want to have happen. So I'll say background color is also going to be yellow. Boom. And since the row rule is still overriding, I get that red in there. Right? Now, if we go down to the rest of them, none of the rest of them say Adams County, so you're not going to have any other yellow in that. Right? But you're still going to have, obviously, the red anywhere that this is over 60. So this is kind of the way the basic table works. We can get a lot more complex about it, but basically you have the different column rules that you could put on, every column that you want to be impacted, and you can call different columns to highlight things or whatever you need to do. You've got your basic table settings, and then you have your row rules. And between all of those, you can really get a pretty nice table that's going to do anything that you want it to do. All right. Now, I've got a table here that I've created from my text, widget, table here that I've created from my text. And then what I can do is I can go to the join section. I can grab a union tool here. I can bring them both together, right? Table 1 and table 2. Now, this is going to be one of the few times that I will generally auto-configure by position, right? In the situation right here, most of the time you're going to have a single table, so you're going to have a single column of data. You might have more and you might need to do something different, but, just be aware that this is one of those times that you might configure by position. And I run that and I get my two tables just stacked up. Then I can go ahead and I can grab that render tool, slap that on back there. And just for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and make that a temporary Excel. Automatically chooses table. I'm going to go ahead and insert that white space in between them, run that. I'm going to look at my output. I've got my first table, which you can see has that red on it. Come down here. And then I've got my second table right here, which looks very different. And so it's just stacking those tables on top of each other, right? That's exactly the same thing we did up here, but you still have all of these capabilities, if you wanted to. In this situation, I could put a formula tool in here and say this is going to be tab X, or this is going to be in this location, or I want to preface the file with this name. Same thing down here. Then you create those two columns, and then you could divide it up as appropriate for what your needs are. Okay. So this is kind of the basics of creating the different table elements and kind of displaying them in different ways. Now, let me move on and let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the report text. I like the report text tool. It gives you some functionality that allows you to put things out there that you can build. Okay, so simple things right here. I'm going to go ahead and just create a report text, and I'm going to say this is for customer one. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and center all that. Now be aware that I can bold it, I can italicize it, underline it. I can bring in graphic elements here, so I could bring an image into this. If I was bringing it in from my data, I could bring in available fields, and I could actually build some text in here and build, more of a paragraph saying, hey, customer so-and-so at address so-and-so, you owe this much money. And so I could build this whole thing and make it pretty nice if I wanted to. You could also do font sizes, etc. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in here. So don't dismiss the report text. You can really build a nice element and then email that out to customers and things like that. But for my purposes, I'm just going to be fairly simple here. Now, I can also go into report text, and I'm going to hook it up to my basic table here. Right? And I'm going to say this is for customer two. And I'm going to center that. Right? Now, when I run these two, note that this is not a green input. This is a non-colored input, which means it's optional. My output here has that text widget, which will just say this. My output here has added that text widget to my existing data flow. All right. Now, for the purposes of what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a select tool. And we will get back to this in a little bit. I just wanted to kind of show you the different ways of doing that. And I'm going to go ahead and drop my text input. Sorry, drop my table. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab a join tool. I'm going to grab a union tool. And the first thing I'm going to do is this is customer one. And then I have table one. And then I have customer two. And then I have table two. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's going to kind of order things in the way I want them ordered. Right? And note that I did have to order them as appropriate. I can go ahead and throw a browse tool after this and run that. And when I look at that, I have, this is customer one. Whoop. Note that it did align them differently, not what I wanted. So this is when I auto configure by position, which stacks them all on top of each other. Now I've got this as customer one and that first table. And then I have this as customer two and that table also. Right? So because I ordered them in the right way, I get what I'm looking for here. Okay. Now, of course, I could send this out to an output, and it's going to give me the exact same output that I have here. All right. Now, let's go ahead and take this to the next level. Okay, so I've created a couple of elements here, and I can be very simple. I can just stack them up, and the render tool is going to go ahead and output that to a file. Right? We can go ahead and drop a render tool on this and go to a temporary Excel. All right, stacks them on top of each other. Order is important here, obviously. You can see, there's your output. And there's my second one right there. And this might be good enough for what you're looking for. But what I can do is I can also combine things. And this becomes more important when you start using more of the elements. Okay? So, for the purposes of here, I'm going to go ahead and the first thing I'm going to do is grab a layout tool. And I'm going to hook it up to this right here. Okay? And this is kind of the reason that I set this up as I did. And what I have is I have a row of data, and the layout tool is going to look at each row of data separately. So when you're building these things, you can have multiple rows of multiple tables, multiple texts, multiple rows of data, and be able to combine things all with one tool, right? And it'll combine things on a record basis, so on a per row basis. So the layout tool allows you to combine things and build a single widget for what was multiple widgets before, right? So when I look at my input here, I've got the table and the text tool. Layout mode is going to be each individual record, but you can do groupings and things like that. So I'm going to do each individual record. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a vertical alignment here, but you can do side by side, which we'll play with a little bit later. I want the text to be first, and then the table second. And if you had more columns, you would just align them. Now, I'm going to center them both. I'm going to configure on the texting tool, and I'm going to center this guy. Let me add a browse after this. Run that. And it has created a single output, the layout, and it's combined the two, so these two elements are now one element. All right. So that's all well and good. But what if I didn't necessarily have them all? Maybe I pulled them from different spots of my canvas or something. Well, I can go ahead and go to the join section and grab a join tool. And I'm going to go ahead and run my text into one side. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my table and run that into the other side. And another one of those ones that I'll join by record position and run that. And this gives me the same output there. So when you're going into the into the layout tool, you're going to want to make sure that everything is in different columns on a single row, and that allows you to align things nicely. When you're going into the render tool, you're going to want things in a column because it's going to render each row separately. So in this situation, I've now put them both like this. I'm going to go ahead and grab that layout tool. I'm going to do each individual, pretty much I'm going to configure it exactly like I configured this one. Each individual record. Text is first in this, so this is already aligned nicely. I'm going to run that. Let me add a browse tool after that. And it's now note that I did not do the vertical edit or the horizontal layout, which is going to throw it side by side. So let's do the vertical layout and run that. And now they're over under. Now, what I want to do is that I have these, on separate. I'm going to go ahead and grab another join tool, run both of those in. I'm going to join by record position and run that. And now I've got both of those layouts side by side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab another layout tool. Now this particular layout tool, I'm going to configure similar to what I've done before, but I'm going to leave this in horizontal as opposed to vertical. Go ahead and add a browse after that and run that. And now what I've got is customer 1 and customer 2 side by side. Right, it kind of centers everything. Right, and I could go into the layout tool here, and instead of centering them, maybe I do upper left, run those. Whoop, it still centered them. Oh, that was horizontal. Sorry. Top, top. Run that. And now they're both aligned on the top. Right? So you've got some flexibility in here in how you're going to align things. And really what it comes down to is, this is like Legos, that you have different elements up here, and we've only played with a couple of them, but we have the different elements up here that we could, build reports, and put them in a table format. We can take the report text and build something with a lot of different information in it. And then we can go ahead and assemble them with the layout tools, either the vertical layouts or the horizontal layouts, and then go ahead and use the techniques that we talked about up here to go ahead and render those to whatever format is appropriate for you, right? You want them individual sheets, individual files, all in one thing. It really depends upon kind of what you're looking for here, right? All right, so before I move on to the next section here, let me go ahead and enhance the report text a little bit. I'm going to drag one of those down and just connect that up straight away. Okay. And I'm going to add a browse tool after that. And with the report text, I said that we could do a lot more with it. And so it would be hello. And then I have available fields here now. I'm going to say available store number. Are you still at? And then maybe we'll throw in the address here. And if I wanted to, I could make that address bold. I could bring in pictures, graphics. I could go ahead and let's go ahead and do a return. And then I'll go ahead and throw a horizontal line in here, right? And then below that line, I can do more text. Whoops, there's my horizontal line. And then I could do more text down here. I could bring in more fields. And when I run that, you can see that it's looking at each individual record there. And it's saying, okay, hello store number, and it's bringing in the elements that I want. So you could build a fairly complex thing here, and it's actually adding that report to the end of every single individual row. Right? So if you wanted to create something fairly complicated, you could actually bring in a lot of customer information, create some really nice text reports around that information, bringing it in so it's going to be customized to each row of data, and then you might attach that to a specific report based upon an element, maybe store number or whatever, that you've created some analytics for later. And so you could have some pretty custom stuff going out as appropriate for your different customers. Let's move on to another element of the reporting tool. So let me go ahead and scroll down here. And what I'd like to do is, we've talked about the reporting text, which is great for like PDF files and things like that. It's a real good way of using conditional to create some nice elements in there. But we could also do some nice graphics. Let me grab an interactive chart here. Right? And we're going to go ahead and hook it up to our same data there. Let me bring it down here. And what I can do with this interactive chart is I could go ahead and build more graphic capabilities. Okay? And again, like everything else in the reporting section, let me add a browse tool after that. And what I do is I configure the chart and I add individual layers. So let me go ahead and add a layer. And in this situation, I'm just going to go ahead and unimaginatively call it first layer. Okay. Now I can bold this, right? Do whatever I want to do with it. I have several different charts that I can choose from. My situation, I'm just going to choose a bar chart, right? Nice and simple. Now I select my X and my Y columns. In this situation, my X column, I'm going to say is county. And so I'm looking at my counties here. And for my Y column, I'm going to go ahead and choose total sales. Total sales. Right? Now note that what it's done is it has actually stacked all the total sales on top of each other here. All right. Now I could add a calculation here. Maybe instead of total sales, I want the sum of my total sales. All right. So now that I've got just one bar with just the sum of my total sales, things like that. So I've got a variety of things, maybe just the count. My count didn't come through so well. Min, max, whatever. Right. Let me go ahead and I'm just going to not have anything for just a moment here just to kind of show you guys. So single layer right here. I got a couple of options that I can play with over here. I got some transformations that I can make, which are a little bit more advanced, and I'm not really going to get into those too much. Style, I've got the font style, so what kind of font, what kind of size, what kind of color do I want? Maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger or smaller. Um, I've got my individual layer here. Now, this is the first layer. If I had multiple layers, I would do each one individually. For colors, I just have a constant color right here. But if I wanted a variable color, I could say, okay, what do I want those variable colors keyed on? And maybe I'll go ahead and say I want them keyed on total sales. And so it's going to give me a gradient. And when I go over there, there's Adams County. And I'm looking at the different sales with each county in there. Right? And you can see it's on a gradient depending upon how high or low the different sales were. Right? Color scale direction, whichever way you want it. Color bar in there so you can kind of see what the gradient is. I just did an auto color scale range, but you could make a custom range if you wanted to and kind of build it yourself. Right? I'm going to auto it there though. You have opacity, so that you can determine, whether you want them to be see-through or not. You could put borders on there. Again, just depends on what you're looking for. For the bar mode, I go ahead, I'm just grouping it here, but you could stack it if you'd rather or whatever. And this is a little bit more if you had a variety of different things, maybe you want it relative or whatnot. So a couple of different ways of doing that. This is kind of overlaying everything by itself there. I'm just going to go ahead and group them. Whether you want to normalize things, the width, the text for the columns, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want the, we'll go to the store number. And then where do I want that store number? Outside. And so I can see the different store numbers, right? I could also put them inside. And so now I have the store numbers actually listed out in each one of those cells. Right? So I can give my chart a little bit more information, whether you're going to constrain the text. So a lot of information that you can show here, whether you want to see or hide the legend here. What do you want to show on your hover text? So when I hover over something, maybe I don't want the X and the Y value. All I want is the text. So there's my store numbers when I hover over, or the trace name, which layer it was. So a lot of these bells and whistles you just kind of have to play with to see what's appropriate, what you like, what you don't like. Some information on the chart itself, right? Whether you want the hover text enabled or disabled. I can put a title on this. So my first chart, right? You see it comes through right up here. And, I can change some of the characteristics. I can put a link in there, etc. I can change my axes. Right now I've got county for my x-axis, but my y-axis is total sales. I can change those. Let's bold total sales. You can see it bolded. Oops. I've also got the display ranges here that I can play with, the lines, whether I want to show grids on it or not, labels for things. So again, it kind of just comes down to what you want to show. What you want to show on your graph, how you want to do it. Lots of ways of configuring things. You can kind of play with the legend a little bit, where you want it, etc. So a lot of things that you can do with the interactive chart. And once you've built it, run that. And you can see there is that chart that I just built. And that chart is just another widget, like everything that we played with up here with the tables. So this is just another element that you can throw in and you can use with your vertical layout, with your layout tools to go ahead and put this over under a chart, so that a table, so you could have a table, a chart, text, all kind of mixed up side by side, over under, whatever is really appropriate for what you're trying to do. Okay, so when you're working with an Excel, be a little bit careful, because as you're building these different elements and putting them together, it's not always going to be able to render in Excel. If you're doing the basic table stuff, it's pretty straightforward. You don't need to worry about that too much. When you start getting into the more graphic elements, or even some of the graphic elements in the report text tool, sometimes it can be a little bit finicky. So if it doesn't render in Excel, just be aware of that, and maybe cut back a little bit about what you're trying to do. All right, so let me go ahead and I'm going to grab another interactive chart here, and I'm going to hook that up. All right. Now, let's go ahead and look at a little bit differently, right? Or add a little more element to it. So let me configure a chart, and I'm going to go ahead and add a layer, and this layer is going to be minimum monthly sales. Okay, well, get rid of that 0. All right, so minimum monthly sales, simple enough. I'm going to go ahead and still do a bar chart for this. For my columns, I'm going to go ahead and do county. And for my y-axis, I'm going to go ahead and do total sales again. But I'm going to add a calculation this time, and I'm going to go ahead and do min. Right, so now I have the minimum sales for each county. Right, and I might go through and I'd add a hover text in there, which would show you the store number and things like that. I'm going to add a second layer. And my second layer is going to be maximum monthly sales. Okay. Bar chart. I'm going to go into county also. I'm going to do total sales, and my calculation is going to be max. Right, so now I can see what my minimum monthly sale is, my maximum monthly sale, all kind of on one nice chart. And I've got my different layers here. And I could keep adding layers if I wanted to. Right? Now, when I'm starting to go through these, right, I'm looking at my different layers here. I can go into text here, and I could say I want the store number, and I want that inside. And so now you can see I have the store number, which is displaying inside each one of the ones here, right? I could also go ahead and come down here and give a hover text. So maybe for the hover text, I want the text. So when I hover over these things, whoops, that's giving me a null. When I hover over these things, it's going to go ahead and show me some of these different elements, right? Let me not constrain the text. Right. So, and I can add this on a per layer basis, right? And that's kind of nice because when I add these, each one can have different hover text, can do different things, can be showing different elements, right? All right. Um, and pretty much all of these are going to allow you to do those different types of things, right? So you kind of go ahead and build exactly what you're looking for in each one of these elements there, right? And we'll go ahead and do this outside. Not sure why it's giving me a null there. All right. So once you kind of have everything you want, build it how you want to do it. You could add the browser, run it, and it's going to give you the charting information, right? And again, it's just another widget that you can go ahead and add. You know, it takes a while to kind of master this. You got to play with it, experiment with it, things like that. All right, let's move on to the last thing that I'd like to talk about here. Let's talk about building more geospatial type maps. All right, let me go ahead and add a browse tool after this. And I'm going to add a browse tool after this. Actually, creating the analytics for these is not something that I really wanted to go into in this course. I'm really looking at more the graphics capabilities. So when I look at this right here, what I've done is I have created a centroid, a point, for each one of these stores based upon the latitude and the longitude. Okay? And when you look at the map, well, it's still rendering. It'll actually show you all the stores on the map itself. Ah, there we go. So now all the stores are on the map. When I look at my other file right here, my state file, and this actually combined the two a little bit. My state file is just a file that I got off of the internet, which has all of the states as polygons, as objects. And there's a lot of information on the internet that you can download for free, a lot of open databases out there that you can grab zip codes, states, cities, etc., as polygons or points or things like that. And that'll kind of help you get started. All right. So the tool that I would like to talk about is going to be the report map. So let me go ahead and drag down the report map here. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hook it up to my states. All right, so states is our line 1 here. Okay. And when I go into the report map, you have your basic settings where you can go ahead and set your size. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to 14 by 10.5. Right? But you can set it to whatever is appropriate for what you're trying to do. You've got a variety of items that you could use there. I'm not going to have any scale on this. I'm not going to worry about it. I am going to use the most recent vintage here, which comes from one of my the data packs that I downloaded. It just shows it a little bit better on the actual map itself. But I could have none there, and there isn't any thing as well. I go into data, and you'll see that I have my first incoming connection, right? So for my first incoming connection, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose that spatial object. That's this one right here, my spatial object, my polygon. Okay. Now, I'm going to actually color these. Okay, let me add a browse tool after this so we can kind of see it, right? So you can see it's just kind of, it's got no background. It's just kind of thrown all of those elements into a map here. But what I'm going to do is on my data layer right here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a thematic field. Right now, I could group things together. I do have some definite options I could do here, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a thematic field, and it's going to be stores per capita. Right. And that's something that I calculated in this these analytics right here. So stores per capita. Now when I go to my layers, what I want to do is I want to create a layer. So I'm going to add a layer here. Whoops. And I'm going to add a polygon layer with line 1. That's because I have polygons here. And I'm going to open that up a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of, I could name it 1 right here, but I'm going to go ahead and name it state heat map. My data connection could be 1. My data connection could be 2. It really depends upon what is appropriate for what you're trying to bring in. For my style, I'm going to go ahead and pretty much leave this that the outline color I'm fine with black. The fill color is going to be gray, etc. But, you know, obviously you could change these as appropriate. Now, my theme is what I get when I have that thematic element chosen. Okay? Now, you can play with the different tile methods up here. For the purposes of this, I'm going to go ahead and just say unique value. I'm going to use the ramp, but you could do a ramp or a map. My start color is going to be blue. My end color is going to be red. You could also put in specific values if you wanted to. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the color map for anything non-specified. And then when I run that, you can see that what it's going to give me here. Whoops. Expand that out. There it is I have a map of the United States with a thematic for the stores per capita in each state. So every state has looked at the per capita and the number of stores in the capita, or sorry, in the state, and it's given me a heat map of that. Right? So fairly straightforward, fairly straightforward, fairly simple on that. Now what I want to do is let's go ahead and add a new element to it. Right? So, you know, I've got the per capita and the polygon. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the stores themselves. Right? The stores are now line 2 here. And with the stores, it's going to be fairly similar to what I've done before, right? Settings are going to be the same. But notice for data, I now have line 2 coming in. And I've got to define line 2, right? And so I don't necessarily want all spatial objects. I'm going to choose the centroid. Because for line 2 right here, the centroid is that point that I created with the longitude and latitude with this tool right here. I'm not going to do any grouping or a thematic field or anything like that. Now, when I go over to my layers, I've got my state heat map layer. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to create another layer, and it's a points layer. And for this one, it's going to be line 2. And when I expand that, I've only got my style because I don't have any thematic methods chosen there. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a point style, and I'm going to make it a diamond. The size, I'm going to go ahead and make 5, make it a little bit smaller than normal. And my color, I'm going to make yellow. Something that'll stand out nicely. And when I run that, I can see my map, and I've got my stores highlighted in yellow down here. And you can see that they're little yellow diamonds. And so I can add different elements to it. I can attach things to my map. And so I can build these really nice graphic displays that can work in a variety of different ways and do a variety of different things. Right? I do have a bunch of options in here. When I'm looking at these, um, you know, do you want it to be something custom, outline colors, opacity, things like that? When I'm looking at my data right here, do I want it to be labeled? Maybe for 2 right here, I'm going to go ahead and label it with the store number. And then when I run it, it'll actually show the store number on each point. So each point has the store number defined to it. Not all points had a store number. Right. So a bunch of things that I can do with this, which is kind of nice, right? And this allows you to take real world things, points, lines, polygons, put them together, uh, actually be able to label them. You put heat maps around things and stuff of that nature, which will allow you to display things in the real world based upon your data. Now, we have headers and footers. I'm going to go ahead and just grab a header here and I'm going to attach that. And I can go ahead and I can, create this header to be anything I want. I'm just going to say heat map of the US and its stores. All right, so that'll go on the top of everything. I'm going to go ahead and include a logo in it. I don't want to use the Alteryx logo, so I'm going to specify a custom logo. And when I go into my graphics here, I've got the ice cream. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there. Put a browse tool on this. Run that. And you can see that when I'm looking at my records here, let me all the way down. I've got my map right here, and I've also got my browse tool right there. And so this is what the header was. Okay. Now, kind of like we learned earlier, I'm going to drag a layout tool down. I'm going to go ahead and put the header on the top. I'm going to do a vertical. Put a browse tool on that. Run that. And now I've got my map right here, or my header up here with my map down below. All right, so you can go ahead and create this how you want. And then we could go ahead and send this off to whatever is appropriate. Right, so now I've created just that layout. I go ahead and add a render tool. Whoops. And I'm going to create a custom document, specific output file. I'm going to look at PCXML. I really like the PCXML files. And I'll do all stores here. Run that. Look at the PCXML. I've got that nice heat map. I got the nice header on there with my picture in there and the text that I put in. And there is my chart right there with my legend. The legend doesn't really look so good. So I'm going to go ahead to legend and I'm going to put no legend in there and run that. And now when I look at it, it looks a little bit better because I don't have that legend in. And you can play with this. Again, this is kind of like the bar chart that we were doing a little bit earlier. There's a lot you can do with this. I'm just kind of getting you started, getting you going on this, but you can play with it until you get exactly what you're looking for. You can see, kind of things are labeled and we have our little diamonds on there. We have our thematic heat map, and you can add as many layers as appropriate to get exactly what you're looking for. So I hope this has kind of got you started, got you thinking about some of the things that you can do. You've got the footers and the headers, and the footers and the headers in here. You've got the report maps, the text, the tables, the render tool, the layout tool. You can build your own legends, but I don't really find that there is a lot of use for that. Interactive chart. You can bring in images, and that pretty much covers the section of the reporting tools. I hope you guys have found this useful. I hope that you guys have learned a bunch. If you guys have any questions, feel free to go ahead and reach out. And I find that the reporting tools are really, really helpful for like PDFs and things like that, but or PowerPoints, emails, whatnot. But if you are looking for interactive graphic elements, you're probably going to be looking at a Tableau or something like that. Okay. Any questions? Let me know. Reach out. Thank you very much.